Have you ever just marveled at how quickly humans and animals too seem to pick up new things, adapting to totally new situations with almost zero prior experience?
Oh, absolutely.
Think about like a toddler figuring out a brand new toy after just a couple of tries, or maybe a mouse navigating a maze it's never seen before in what feels like moments.
Yeah. It's incredibly efficient. It's almost like a biological superpower, really.
It is, and it's such a stark contrast, isn't it, to what we often see in artificial intelligence?
Right. Standard AI, especially the kind that learns through trial and error, like reinforcement learning algorithms, they typically rely on these slow incremental updates.
It's forever, right?
Pretty much. They often need thousands, sometimes, millions of examples to learn something new, which just doesn't capture that lightning fast adaptation we see in, well, us. In biological brains.
So that's the core challenge we're looking at. But, okay, what if we told you that one of the main theories for this rapid biological learning points to something called episodic memory?
Our ability to recall specific past experiences.
Exactly, to help us make decisions in totally new contexts. And here's the kicker. What if a really cutting-edge type of AI called transformers uses a mechanism that's actually very similar?
And that is precisely our focus today. We're going to dive deep into some fascinating new research. It's from Qingfeng and Kanaka-Rajan at Harvard Medical School and the Kempter Institute.
Okay.
And they've explored how transformers aren't just, storing memories, but are actively using them as a kind of powerful computational workspace for rapid learning, for decision-making.
Right. So our mission today is to unpack how these AI models are learning in ways that, maybe surprisingly, mirror the human brain.
Yeah.
And how memory isn't just this passive photo album of the past, but an active computational tool, something that can actually perform calculations within its stored experiences.
To get ready for some potential aha moments, I think.
I think so, too. Okay, so let's set the stage a bit more. We've talked about how humans and animals learn so efficiently, often from what researchers call sparse data, meaning very little information.
Right. That mouse in the maze you mentioned, it can find the best path after just a handful of successful attempts. Maybe even just one sometimes.
Which is amazing.
It is. And traditional reinforcement learning algorithms, the ones that incrementally update these value functions, which is basically how good a state or an action is, they just don't do well with so little data.
They need that repetition.
Exactly. So, a leading theory for why biological agents, like us or that mouse, are so efficient is their reliance on episodic memory. It lets them instantly recall specific past experiences, specific moments, and use that memory to guide decisions in brand new situations.
So they kind of arrive with useful priors? Is that the term?
Yeah, priors. It's like a kind of built-in knowledge, really shaped by evolution, maybe just past experiences, that lets them generalize incredibly quickly, make smart guesses.
Okay, so if episodic memory is such a game changer for biology, how does this translate over to artificial intelligence?
Well, this new research takes a specific type of AI, a transformer model, and trains it to perform something called in-context reinforcement learning.
In-context RL.
Okay. And they do this on navigation tasks. Tasks actually inspired by how rodents behave in labs.
Ah, interesting.
And transformers are really relevant here because their architecture, the sort of key value memory architecture they have, it's been widely linked to models of episodic memory in the brain already. There's a known parallel.
So there's a reason they picked transformers for this.
Definitely. And what's fascinating here is the setup itself. Imagine this transformer model. For each new environment it encounters, it gets these exploratory trajectories as context.
Okay, so like recordings of movements and outcomes it's already seen in that specific maze.
Exactly. Just a few examples of wandering around. Then, based only on that context, it has to figure out the best way to act to reach a goal, the best goal-directed policy.
And crucially, you said they tested these on held-out tasks.
Yes. Environments the model had never seen before, with completely novel sensory observations. So it wasn't just seeing the same walls painted a different color.
And the model had to guide its behavior. How? Without any parameter updates.
Precisely. That's the critical distinction here. This isn't about retraining the model, tweaking its internal weights based on the new maze. It's true in-context learning. It's driven solely by the information it holds in its memory, its context, and its current internal state. No learning in the traditional AI sense.
Wow, okay. So what kind of mazes did they use?
They used two main types to really put this to the test. The first were spatially regular grid worlds. Think of a grid of squares. These were inspired by the classic Morris water maze experiment.
Where the mouse has to find a hidden platform.
Exactly. The reward location is hidden. The agent has to find it based on exploration.
Okay, standard enough. What was the second type?
The second were hierarchically structured tree mazes. Now, these are really interesting because they're non-Euclidean.
Meaning, not like a regular grid.
Right. They don't follow typical straight-line geometry. Think
Right.
more like branching paths in a tree, forks in the road. These are known to really challenge standard sequence models. Even things like language models struggle with this kind of structure.
Okay, so a grid and a tree structure. And the input wasn't just seeing the maze.
No, it was quite abstract, actually. Each state the AI experienced, like a location in the maze, was represented by a 10-dimensional Gaussian vector. So not simple images, but a sort of abstract sensory signal. Makes it harder to just memorize visuals.
Got it. Okay, so now for the results, the really surprising part. AI that learns like a mouse.
Yeah, the models showed a remarkable learning speed. In those grid worlds, they achieved near maximal performance after. Get this. Just one reward exposure.
Just one time finding the reward.
Just one successful trial. And boom, near perfect performance afterwards. It's strikingly similar to the one-shot learning we see in actual rodents navigating those water mazes.
That's incredible. What about the tree mazes? Were they harder?
They were harder, yes, but they still showed rapid learning after only a few reward exposures. Not quite one shot, but still incredibly fast.
And how do they stack up against standard AI methods?
Well, when the researchers compared these meta-learned transformer models to standard RL methods like tabular Q-learning or deep Q networks, DQNs, the transformers significantly outperformed them.
Like by a lot.
A lot, yeah. This huge performance gap really highlights the power of those learned priors we talked about. That pre-existing knowledge the transformer gained from all the previous different tasks it was trained on. It carries that general know-how into new situations.
Okay, that makes sense. But you mentioned something even more interesting. The shortcut phenomenon.
Yes. This is where it gets really wild in those grid world tasks, right? Even when the model only observed a long, twisty, roundabout path to the reward during its exploration phase. It often inferred, and then actually executed, the shortest possible route to the goal, frequently cutting through states, through grid squares it had never actually visited before.
Whoa, so it didn't just replay the path it saw?
Not at all. Quantitatively, the model selected the shortcut path in over 60% of the test simulations, compared to like 2% for just a random policy.
60%. That strongly suggests it wasn't just memorizing routes, right? It must have, built a map.
Exactly. It suggests the agent had internalized the underlying Euclidean geometry of the environment. It built an internal map, maybe even like an internal compass, that allowed it to figure out the straightest line, even if it had never walked that specific line.
That's seriously cool. Did anything like that happen in the tree mazes? They don't have simple shortcuts like a grid.
Not shortcuts in the same way, but something arguably even more sophisticated emerged. In the tree mazes, the meta-learned model acquired a different but incredibly useful prior, the ability to infer inverse actions.
Inverse action, what does that mean?
It means it could figure out how to get back from a place, even if it only encountered that place after finding the reward. It's like it could mentally reverse the optimal path from the goal backward.
Okay. Why is that useful?
Well, traditional Q-learning really struggles with that. If it only learns values going forward, knowing where you came from after you've reached the goal doesn't help much. But this model could use that backward information effectively. It could still perform well, even if the key state was only seen late in the exploration.
So different maze structures led to different but equally clever learned strategies.
Precisely. And these rapid behavioral results, the shortcuts, the inverse actions, they gave the researchers a huge clue.
Which was?
That how the model learns representations, how it internally organizes the information it gets, must be absolutely key to this rapid learning.
So they needed to look inside the model's head, so to speak.
Exactly. They started looking at how the model was organizing its state representations within its memory. And the findings there were, well, pretty profound.
Okay, let's talk about that. In-context structure learning, was it?
Yes. So in the grid world, as the model got more experience within a specific maze, its internal representations of the grid world states became incredibly structured. You could actually visualize them, and they visually reflected the underlying geometry of the maze. It was like the model was drawing a precise mental map internally.
Wow.
And here's a really surprising part. This structure became strong in a specific layer of the transformer they noted layer 2, which is a deeper processing stage. and it was unaffected by the presence or absence of reward.
Really? So it learned the layout even if it hadn't found the goal yet?
Yes. It was learning the map itself, the spatial relationships, not just, which way the treats were.
That's fundamental. What about the tree mazes? Did they show structure too?
They did. For the tree mazes, the representations organized into a clear bifurcating structure, perfectly mirroring that hierarchical branching layout of the maze.
So it captured the tree-ness of it.
Exactly. It learned the sort of coarse, high-level structure rather than just fine-grained details. And what's really fascinating here is how much this structure learning process resembles something called predictive map formation that scientists believe happens in the hippocampus.
The memory center of the brain.
That's the one. A critical brain region for memory and navigation in us and other animals. So, a striking parallel.
Okay, that's already pretty mind-blowing. But wait, you said it gets even more surprising.
It does. Cross-context alignment. This is the next piece. The model didn't just learn the structure within one environment, one maze.
Okay.
It actually aligned its representations across completely different environments.
Yeah.
As long as they shared a similar underlying structure. Even when their sensory observations, what they actually looked like, those 10-dimensional vectors, were completely different.
Hold on, so 2 different grid mazes, maybe with totally different abstract textures or whatever the vectors represented.
Right.
It would represent the same location, like the top left corner, similarly in its internal map for both mazes.
That's exactly what they found. States occupying the same relative grid location across multiple distinct grid worlds were encoded more similarly internally than states from different locations within the same maze.
Even if the input signals were unique to each maze.
Even then. And this alignment wasn't just pairwise. You could see it clearly when they projected the representations from many different environments into a single shared internal space. The structures lined up.
Okay, that raises a huge question. If they weren't explicitly trained to do this, to align maps across mazes, how on earth did these sophisticated alignment strategies just emerge?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? The research suggests they emerged opportunistically, like as a byproduct of the meta-learning process itself.
Opportunistically, meaning?
Meaning the model wasn't given an instruction manual saying, align your maps. It just learned, through the process of being trained to solve many different navigation tasks efficiently, that creating these aligned, structured representations was an incredibly useful and efficient way to organize its internal world. It helps it generalize faster to the next new maze.
So it discovered this incredibly clever trick all on its own just because it helps solve the overall problem better.
That seems to be the case. It's an emergent property of learning to learn.
Which brings us to the really deep part, right? The how. How is it actually doing this? Because it sounds like a new kind of algorithm might be emerging here.
That's perhaps the most intriguing finding. The reinforcement learning strategy these transformers developed does not seem to fit neatly into our traditional boxes. It's not quite model-free, and it's not quite model-based planning as we usually understand them.
Okay, let's break that down. Why isn't it model-free? Those are the ones based on values, right? Like Q learning.
Right. Model-free methods typically rely heavily on learning value functions. How good is this state, or taking this action in this state? They follow gradients of value. But here, the researchers found that decoding the simple Euclidean distance to the goal from the model's internal states was actually more accurate at predicting the model's success than decoding the traditional action-based value function.
So location and direction seemed more important than the learned value.
In the grid worlds, yes. And in the tree mazes, the value estimates the models seemed to hold were only reliable, like within 2 or 3 steps of the reward. That's just not enough information to guide behavior effectively over the whole complex maze. So value alone wasn't driving it?
Okay, so not primarily value-based. Then why isn't it model-based planning? That's where the AI simulates paths, right? Like trying out routes mentally.
Exactly. Traditional model-based planning involves simulating sequences of states and actions, mentally stepping through the environment. But the analysis here showed something different. The model's decisions seemed primarily influenced by memories associated with its current location, the query state, and the goal state.
And not the states in between.
Very little influence, surprisingly. Little to no influence from those intermediate memory tokens along a potential path. They even did ablation studies.
Meaning they removed information.
Yeah, they computationally removed those intermediate memory tokens from the context the model could access. And guess what? The model could still often make the correct decision.
Which completely contradicts typical path planning, where those intermediate steps are absolutely crucial.
It does. If you were planning a route across town, you wouldn't just think about your start and end point, you'd think about the streets in between. This model didn't seem to need that nearly as much.
So, if it's not model-free and it's not model-based, what is it doing?
This is the core insight. The research suggests the model uses its memory in a truly novel way. Each memory token, remember, that's like a record of a past experience. State, action, reward isn't just a static data point.
Okay.
It also seems to store additional intermediate computations. Things calculated after the experience happened, but stored with the memory, ready to be accessed instantly at decision time.
So memory itself becomes an active computational workspace, like a scratch pad attached to each memory.
That's a great way to put it. Memory becomes an active computational substrate. It's not just storage. It's part of the calculation engine.
Wow. Okay. Can we break down the specific strategy it seemed to use in each maze type? Let's start with the grid world. How did it find those shortcuts?
Right. For the grid world, the model appears to do something like this. First, it uses that in-context experience, the exploration, to align its internal representations to a Euclidean space. It builds that invisible mental grid we talked about, probably by sort of locally stitching together neighboring transitions it has seen.
Okay, step 1. Build the map internally.
Step 2. Given its current location, the query state, it calculates the angle in this internal Euclidean space directly between where it is now and where the goal state is represented on its map.
Like drawing a straight line on its mental map.
Exactly. And step 3, it uses this calculated angle to select an action that moves it in that direction. Go northeast, for example.
So it's essentially calculating the bearing to the target and moving that way, even if it hasn't traversed that specific path before.
That seems to be the strategy. And this is supported by the fact that they could accurately decode not just the XY position, but also this angle to goal from both the current query token and the context memory tokens themselves, especially by that layer 2 of the transformer. The angle information was embedded right there in memory.
Incredible. Okay. What about the more complex tree maze strategy? No simple angles there.
No, a more complex but equally elegant strategy seemed to emerge there. It looks like this. First, the model uses its experience to essentially stitch transitions backward from the goal. And as it does this, it tags certain context memory tokens, specifically the ones that lie on the critical left-right path to the reward in that tree structure.
So it identifies the key decision points leading to the goal from its memories.
Kind of, yeah. It marks the memories that are part of the optimal solution path. Then, step 2. When it's at a query state, it quickly checks its memory. Are there any context memory tokens containing this query state that also have that I'm on the critical LRR path tag?
Okay, what if there aren't?
If not, it defaults to a simple, generally useful heuristic. Take the action leading towards the parent node in the tree, which is actually the optimal action for most states in these kinds of mazes.
A smart default. But what if it does find tag memories for its current location?
Then, step 3. It extracts the optimal left-right action directly from those tagged context memory tokens. These tokens seem to encode the necessary inverse action, the correct turn to make at that specific junction on the path back from the goal.
So the tagged memories themselves contain the answer for that specific critical decision point.
Precisely. And again, the analysis backs this up. They found they could accurately decode directly from the context memory tokens whether a token was on that LR path and also what the correct inverse action was.
The memory tokens are doing the heavy computational lifting again.
Exactly. It means the model can make the correct decision even if it only attends to or focuses on memory tokens involving its current location and that are tagged as being on the optimal path. It doesn't need to simulate forward or backward much at decision time. The answers are pre-computed and stored within the relevant memories.
Okay, wow. This whole deep dive, it really reveals that the kind of rapid adaptation we see in animals, and now, surprisingly, in these transformer models, it's being explained by reinforcement learning strategies that they lie outside our traditional model-free or model-based frameworks.
It really seems that way. It's suggesting a potentially new category of learning and planning.
Yeah, and despite being totally artificial, this meta-learn-to-model is displaying phenomena that are strikingly similar to things we see in actual neural activity in brains.
Right. The learning of the environment structure, this alignment of representations across diverse, unique environments, even if they look different, and these biased memory recall patterns right at the point of making a decision. It resonates with neuroscience findings.
So the big idea here seems to be that if we want to truly understand the cognitive processes that underpin rapid learning, both in sophisticated AI and in ourselves, we probably need to consider a much broader space of possible planning strategies than we typically do.
I think that's a key takeaway. We need to broaden our definitions.
And crucially, it offers this totally novel understanding of episodic memory, doesn't it? It's not just a passive storehouse, some dusty archive of past events.
Not at all. Instead, each memory trace can be an active computational resource. It holds not just the raw experience, but potentially these additional internal computations that are instantly useful for making flexible, smart decisions in the moment.
Memories that compute.
In a sense, yes.
Yeah.
Memory as computation.
So the provocative thought to leave folks with is, if AI can learn to compute within its memories to adapt so quickly, what does that imply about the hidden computational power lurking in our own memories, in our own brains?
That's a deep question. And how might this new understanding of memory, not just as storage, but as this dynamic computational workspace, how might that transform the way we design the intelligent systems of the future?
Lots to think about. The deep dive definitely continues.